All right, welcome everyone. We've just gone on 11 o'clock here in New Zealand, and I want to welcome you all to the second webinar in this LT webinar series. So I want to introduce myself. I am Liam Farley. I'm based here in Dunedin, New Zealand, and if you can see my screen, then see me, then you can see that I'm sitting in a very LT branded room, working from home as New Zealand is in lockdown. So hopefully we've got everyone joined in now, and I want to also introduce the other panelists in this webinar series. We've got Ari Boulay, who some of you might know from the first webinar last week. Ari is the CSM for North America. We've also been joined by Sam Payton and Brandon Calderon, who are the education product managers. They're going to be answering any questions that you might have behind the scenes and leaving some for me to answer live. And so the topic of this webinar is going to be about example data in LT. So this is something that I imagine, hopefully all of you are very interested in, otherwise why would you have joined the webinar? So we're going to be covering simple versions of this and more advanced versions of this. And what I'm going to do first though is guide you through what you can do to help yourselves. So there are many ways to go about seeking information within LT. So there's the drop down, looking at LT instance now, that there's the drop down of support. So if you haven't already, I highly recommend going to our support site. So if I click on that, it will take me out to a new tab, and this is the support site, which has a COVID specific area that has a very tailored introduction to LT, where you can look at videos as well as ask any questions or look for any articles you might need to be answering for yourself. So there's also another option, just jumping back into LT, where you can provide or ask feedback of the developers. So this is in the drop down here, where you can, if you're having particular issues with LT or you have any feedback to us, please provide that in this option. And the final option I really want to introduce you to is the LT community. So we're really wanting to drive a lot of engagement in the community, so we can have ongoing discussions from this these webinars in the community, but it's also a great place to be posting questions in general, to be talking with other educators, and really just getting that network going with LT users. So if you're not already a member of this, you can join by selecting the not a member option and creating an account and logging in. So if you can hear the wind, it's a very windy day here in Dunedin. All right, so as always though, you can reach out to CSMs like myself and other ADI representatives if you have any questions. I have to admit, it feels very strange talking to myself in a room, not being able to see any of you. Bear with me while I get over that. Okay, so what we want to do with this webinar is allow you to be asking questions throughout. And so what you'll notice is there's the Q&A option in Zoom, and you can be asking questions throughout, and there are set places where I'll pause what I'm going through and answer those questions. Also, Sam, Ari, and Brandon will be answering any that they can on the fly. There's also the chat function. I ask you to not be asking questions in the chat. That's more just for saying hi, bye, or maybe talking to any of the panelists if you're having issues with Zoom. And there's also a polling function. So I'm actually going to start the first poll now. And this is, all right, here we go. So hopefully you should all see polls now. And this is just to get an idea of where you're at in your own journey with LT. and also what your experience is of example data in LT. Trying to make this more of an interactive webinar this time. So I'll leave it open for about a minute or so, so you can read through those options. I feel like I should be singing some elevator music to you all to fill in the gap.
Cool. So I'm going to shoot those poll results now for you.
Sorry, Ellen, I saw your comment. You did not want to hear me sing. All right. So poll results. Hopefully everyone can see those now. All right. So looking there, so still, about a third of you are evaluating your options, and also a third of you started using LT with students already. That's great. And then a few, that are browsing contents and starting to set up the instance. And we've got a few advanced people that are using grading and analytics. In terms of experience with example data, wow, okay, so about 3/4 of attendees, example what now? Not really sure what example data is, so that's great that we can reach so many of you at once and guide you through what you can do with example data in LT. And we've got up to 1 pro in there, so someone who backs themselves. I like the confidence. I'm glad that, you know what you're doing. And hopefully there'll be some new information here for that one person. All right, so I'll share my screen again and we'll delve into example data. So bear with me. So, all right, okay, so the way of structuring this webinar was to start simply, and this is for those of you that are really time poor and just need to get the example data displaying to students quick and easily, because who knows, maybe you had a lab due 2 days ago and you've got your 3 kids running around your ankles and you're all stressed out and you really want to get that example data shown to your students. So I'm going to show first what example data usually looks like in a non-COVID era, where students are actually able to sit within 2 meters of each other and work together in a lab. So I'm opening up a ADI lesson, hard and ECG, and jumping to the activity page where there'll be a data panel, and we're seeing the example data displaying by default. And how to actually go about that was a setting that is in the course settings. So if I jump back out and go to settings and scroll down to example data settings, we can see that it's on by default. And there are different options here. So if it was on with access code, which for some of you who are already LT users, this is what it might be. So to give you an idea of what it looks like and potentially might be looking like for you at the moment, if we now come back into the lesson and go back to that page, we'll see likely a very boring grey box. While students can be recording now, if they've got a Power Lab set up, this is not going to be of much use if they're working remotely. But something that I want to point out now is if you are lucky enough to still be teaching labs face-to-face and you want to be using example data, you can actually be accessing the example data by holding down Shift on your keyboard and then selecting the Start button, and it'll bring up the example data option. And when you press that, you put in your very strong password, which you may have seen before, and this will unlock the example data. But again, if you have students that are working remotely and needing to see the example data by default, I'll show you one last time how to go about enabling example data by default. So it's under settings for a course, example data settings, and on by default. All right. So once again, coming back into that lesson, hopefully not giving anyone motion sickness jumping around. And back to our favorite activity. So if you've never actually seen example data or data in LT at all, or even LT in general, then this is, is a data panel with the example data shown, nicely labeled here. And you can be navigating around that data and starting to generate values from it. just a bit of a side note about how ADI lessons have been set up with data is that there'll usually be an activity page where students are stepping through the procedures and then moving on to do the analysis of that data. And what you'll notice is that the data is aliased between the two pages. So anything that's changed on this data panel will be reflected in this data panel. But if you're teaching remotely and you feel that there's not much point showing the procedures as to how the data was collected, then we can start to edit the lesson and tailor it more to be suitable for online remote teaching. And so what I did there was select the edit button, which is available only to educators. Students definitely won't see that. And now we can be seeing the underlying components of a lesson LT. And again, if you're very new to LT, I highly recommend looking at our support site to get up to speed as to the basics of LT. So we've got the data panel here, and we can do a couple of things with it. So one is we can actually double click into it and we can see the data file here, and there's this download option. And so if I was to select that and download, we'll see that it downloads two files. So one is the settings file, and this is if you're wanting to allow students to be recording their own data again. And this data document file is the example data that we're after. So what we're looking for is the ADI CHT file. And what we can do with that is if we click out of this panel here, scroll down a little bit, and it's as simple as dragging on the file. So I'm just going to pop it here, and it will import that data. And this is slightly different to the panel above. So I might bring them side by side so you can get a feel for it. Ooh, maybe not. And the difference between is this one is where students could actually, if they had a Power Lab hooked up, they could actually be starting recording, but obviously if they're working remotely, that's not going to be of use. So this data panel here is actually a read-only data panel, and it's lacking that option to start. So this is a additional option that you can have. By all means, you don't need to do it. Simply unlocking the example data by default could be enough for most of your needs, because you will have to do this for every data panel. If you're wanting it as a read-only, you have to do it for each data panel, which could take some time. But if you're a perfectionist minimalist like myself, that might appeal to your nature. Also, in terms of read-only data panels, they're useful because you can be putting them in pre-lab preparation lessons, because then students can be getting an idea of what to expect when they come into a lab. So that's particularly useful if you are able to teach face-to-face, that you can be showing students what data you're expecting them to be able to generate when they come into the lab. Because having taught physiology before, there always seems to be that one group that records data and it looks nothing like what you expect physiological data to look like, and then they still continue through the lesson and you only realize at the very last minute. So both of these panels can still be, still function in the same way in terms of analysis, but what you might notice is we're not getting any values displaying in the value panel here. That's because you can only have one data panel per page in terms of having value panels being able to read. So it's not knowing which one to read from. So if we delete that one out, what we should see is that now when we do analysis, you're able to see the values here. And on that note, if you are either importing read-only data panels, or any data panel, in fact, I highly recommend when you double click into it that you set the readout by default to be average, and I'll show you soon what the difference is between average, maximum, minimum, and first value. And we'll set this to auto. So the difference between average and minimum max is that it's going to display either the average, the minimum, or the maximum within this range that you're using for your region selectors. But if you're only using the point selector, then it doesn't matter because there is only one value. And in terms of value panels, yeah, you can choose what channel you want to be displayed. So we could change that to the ECG, and again, we could try and have the maximum value. And so that should give the peak of the QRS complex. So yeah, that's the first part done. So I'm going to jump back, and yeah, hopefully everyone could see that. All right, so I'll look at some of the questions now, and we've got 3 that have come up. So I'm going to look first and see. Okay, so first question from Terry. Hi, Terry. Lessons I've seen so far use scope panels. Can I use lab chart data and pull it into scope panels? Yes, so same works for both data panels and scope panels. So I will answer that live and show you quickly for scope panels. So if we, jump back into LT and go out to another lesson that I know has a scope panel in it. So this one is the conduction velocity. And same deal, we can go to an activity. This time it's a scope panel. And for those of you that are new to LT and wondering what the difference is between data panel and scope panel, is this is a scope panel where you've got essentially a short recording block, and they're layered on top of each other. So you can see as I'm clicking through the numbers, there are different ones. You can hide these, so you're only seeing individual ones. The principle is the same though, in terms of you can download the example data that is embedded in this. And this time, yeah, it's going to be a scope panel. The key difference is if you're wanting to have a read-only data panel, then when you drag on the file, you want to hover over this icon here, and it gives you the option to do read-only data and read-only scope. So we can do read-only scope and delete the original one, and voila. So now we've got a read-only, but this time it's a scope panel. So hopefully that has answered your question, Terry. Yeah, so you can use both scope panels. They're both exported as ADI CHT files, and it's more just how you put it into LT. All right, so keeping track of time, there's a few other things. We only got 25 more minutes. So David asking, would ADI be able to provide some of the lessons with read-only example data panels? Maybe the most popular lessons. That's a very good question, David. And that's something that he'll talk to the team about after the webinar, and we can get back to you about that. There are a lot of lessons, but I like the idea of maybe doing at least the most popular. Cool. Yes, so yeah, we could be trying to figure out, doing a poll. So yeah, we can figure out what are the most popular ones. So keeping in mind the time, we'll deal with that later on, but thanks for asking that, David. And Cynthia, so are we able to then upload our own data as sample data for students working remotely? Perfect question, because that's the very next section that I'm going to be talking about and demonstrating. So thank you, Cynthia, for making this look very slick. So yeah, I'll be showing you soon how to add your own data. All right, so just to come back and introduce the next section, which is editing and creating your own example data. So once again, jumping around, and come back into the ECG lab. It's one of my favorite labs, and it's got some nice data to work with. And we'll edit it again. And what I'm going to do is just show you again, in case some pesky kids came in for a snack and distracted you as I did it. I will click into the data panel, and again, you can download the settings files and example data files that are embedded into that data panel in LT with this option here. And you can see you've got the 2 files downloaded. And this is where introducing a bit of software that some of you might be familiar with, which is LabCharts. So LabCharts is a very powerful bit of data acquisition analysis software used extensively in the research field, but also can be used in education. And LabChart is essentially what's under the hood for data panels in LT. And what I can do is open up this file in LabChart. And here we go. In terms of accessing LabCharts, because you will need LabCharts to be editing settings file and example data files in LT. And if you don't have access to LabChart, please reach out to your ADI representative and we can sort you out, because it's a bit mean to not allow you to edit the data files. So this is LabChart, and you can appreciate, hopefully, how much more complicated it is. And yeah, so it's got a lot more features, but in terms of keeping the task for this webinar about LT example data, I won't go into many of the features of LabChart, but again, you can reach out to your ADI rep if you're interested in LabChart. And a bit of a shout out actually to our research team, who next week are releasing a very cool new feature or new suite to do with LabChart. So if you're in research and using LabChart, keep an ear out for that next week. All right, so we've got the LabChart file open, and you can see that the data is exactly what was in LT, a lot more functionality. And so what you can do is maybe make some tweaks. So there's, say for example, you want to add a new channel. So what we can do is change the number of channels to 3, and maybe we want to make a heart rate. It's where I can never type well when people are watching, or I know people are watching, even though I can't see any of you. All right, so we'll make cyclic measurements, and we'll pick ECG human. So what it's going to do is it's going to count along and be able to figure out the heart rate based on the ECG channel. So once do that and hit OK, we can now see that we've got this 3rd channel coming in, and as I'm moving the cursor along, we're seeing the change in heart rate. And this person must be a very fit person because that's a really low heart rate. All right, and you can change scaling around, and as simple as that, brought in a 3rd channel. You can also be changing the comments that might be associated with this file, because at the moment students aren't able to create and edit or delete comments in LT data files, example data. So that is something the team's working on, and Sam has said that that's going to be coming pretty soon. So keep a watch out for the ability to change comments. All right, so to do that, you can just right click and say maybe participant's name. Or can he spell it right? He does, hopefully. Okay, so once you have made the edits that you want in LabChart and you want to bring this back into LT, you can just go simply save, but I'll just point out what we're saving it as. I'm saving it as a LabChart data file, and you might want to rename that to something very intuitive, like demo me this, and we'll save that to desktop, which hopefully isn't cluttered with 1,000 files. And if we then come back to LT, what we can do is we can then click back into the data panel. And now this is something I'll indulge me with. I'll show you how to actually embed example data into a data file or data panel that students can actually record from. And the way this is done is you're actually providing instant feedback to the students and then removing their option to look at that feedback. So what I'm going to do is change it to instant feedback, select edit answer, and then I'm going to clear the answer and add some new data. So I'm going to add, trying to remember where I put it, demo me this, there we go. Okay, so now I'm importing the recently changed lab chart file. And so we can see that we've got the new comment and we've got that third channel coming in. And so this is now hidden behind the scenes for the students. And you can also, if you know where that file is on your desktop, you can again be dragging it in and dropping it if you want a read-only data panel. So that's, yeah, if you're wanting to edit ADI data panels. But yeah, we had a question from Cynthia before about adding your own. And so this is where it gets a bit tricky because obviously it depends on what the data is, where it's been recorded. If it's been recorded in LabChart already, then you can simply save it as a ADICHT file, and then you can do what I've shown before and just drag those files in. But the tricky one is, I guess, if the data has been recorded outside of LabChart, how do you bring it in? And there are ways to go about this, and I'll try and demonstrate this, but we may need to do a more in-depth webinar or series looking at how to bring it in from outside of our LabChart. So if we were to jump back into LabChart, what we can do is highlight that there's the option to be able to save as, we can export as, not save as, sorry, export as a text file. And this is just going to highlight the file format that you likely will need to convert the example data that you have outside of LabChart into in order for LabChart to be able to read it. So I've now exported that as a text file, and we can see that should be sitting in the desktop, and it's a very boring file full of numbers, but just highlighting that these are the raw XY or point values at each time point. So we can see we've got 1,000 Hertz sampling rate, and the actual values in millivolts for each of those ones. So that's what we're trying to get is the actual XY values, and then we can be importing that into LabChart. So you can actually, if you have LabChart and you've managed to generate a text file from whatever example data file you had outside of LabChart, you can then go open with LabChart. And it's obviously going to look pretty similar once I import it, because it's the exact same data file as before. And so by default, it will give you 8 channels, and so we're only interested in the 3. And so we can quickly drop that back down to 3. And so so kind of redundant what I did there of exporting it as text and then bringing it back in, but hopefully it shows you the underlying principle of that you're essentially trying to get any example data that you have outside of LabChart into a text format, and then importing that into LabChart. And then now that it's in LabChart, it can therefore be put into LT by just saving as ADICHT file and then dragging that file into LT, whether it's a read-only data file or data panel or a actual data panel. And the same deal with scope panels as well. So if there are people that are wanting to bring in their own example data that is being generated outside of LabCharts, maybe we can be running a poll afterwards, or you could be asking questions now, and we could be teeing up a future webinar about this, or you could be putting this on the LT community if there's a large number of you, and we could be having discussions there. Okay, so I think that should hopefully be enough for that particular area of editing and creating example data. and we'll do another poll. So if my pollster, Sam the pollster Payton, if you don't mind generating the next poll, please. Oh, there we go. All right, hopefully everyone can see the polls. Okay. We've got a few Q&As coming in, so we'll get to those after the poll as well. Just note that there are 2 questions in the poll as well, so make sure you scroll down to the second one. And just noting that, yeah, these poll questions, but beyond the example data theme, we're just trying to get a better idea of how we can better help you and what future webinar topics you'd like us to talk about. I'm still not going to sing for you, Alan. All right, Sam, I think that's probably enough if you want to start closing it down, maybe. Oh, all right, so we've got a bit of a clear winner there. Editing content to fit my course objectives. Wow. I think that's something we're actually planning to do already in the future webinar series, so that's good to know. But this is very useful information for us, so we can tailor our offerings to better support you all. And yeah, not surprisingly, yeah, editing and creating lessons, which we've actually already decided to do in a future webinar. But once again, the support site has some very helpful videos guiding you through this. But the LT community is also another great option to join, particularly if you're new to LT. There are some users that have been using LT for a few years now. And so, yeah, hopefully they'll be kind enough to maybe give you some tips and tricks, as well as us ADI staff. And this, incorporating LT into your existing learning environments, that is something that we can focus on as well. We do have integrations with some learning management systems, and there are ways to link out from your learning management system to LT. Also, thanks for asking or answering those polls, and we'll now jump on to Q&A. So we've got 4 questions now. Thankfully, Sam, Brandon, and Ari have been answering some behind the scenes. All right, so Terry again. So, all right, yes, it does. I'm on Mac. Lab chart files have to be in Windows format. Yes, so in terms of Mac, it gets a bit tricky. We do recommend using Windows where possible. So Terry might reach out to you about that in particular, and then we can be posting any Mac-related resources either on the community or our customer website. So in terms of a desirable seconds of recording length for a scope panel, that does depend on what you are recording. It's a tricky one, depending on the animal, the tissue being used, but obviously not having too long a recording, so you've got a big tail end that could make the recording trace look ugly for students, though you might be able to tweak things in lab charts if you have an excessively long recording period for scope. All right, so next question from Brian. Hi, Brian. If I cannot access the lab to create new sample data, can I access data acquired by students last year to use as sample data this year? Great question. So it depends on what formats that data is in. If it has been recorded in LT at the moment, there is not a way to export that data, but if it was recorded in lab charts, then you can. And this is where working together, hopefully we can help each other. And again, plugging the LT community as an avenue for this is that if there are people that have example data that they're willing to share, then we're definitely willing to try and help facilitate the sharing of that, assuming IP issues aren't going to be an issue. So yeah, Brian, if it has been recorded in lab charts, that should be okay, but if it has been recorded in LT in previous years, unfortunately, we're not able to get that data at the moment. All right, and so Terry, you're a bit confused about replacing sample data. Use the drop down with the command upload settings file, but I think upload ADI CHT file instead. Yes, yeah, correct. So you want to be, of example data, you want to be uploading ADI CHT files. So I can quickly go over that again, looking at the time. I think we've got a few minutes to do this. So yeah, I'll not thank you just yet. Okay, so in terms of replacing sample data, so again, there's two ways to go about it. If you've got a actual data panel that students can be recording from, then the option to do that is allowing instant feedback and editing the answer and dragging on whatever example data you have to replace that. And something I didn't do last time actually was turn off instant feedback so the students can't see the check answer option. And yeah, in terms of adding or replacing sample data, hopefully, Terry, that's covered what you're after. But if you still need further help, we can touch base after this webinar. Okay, so David again. Yes, so will the LT platform in future allow live data capture, e.g. from safe wireless transducers? Restricted about, that's probably a question for Sam. It'll be cool in the future. I'd love to see that, but obviously you have to weigh up other priorities. So that's cool feedback to have that. So yeah, maybe watch this space, David. And yeah, Terry again. So breaking up lab chart files into smaller ones, and then yeah, oh, and it's gone. Oh no, there we go. So convert from lab chart for Windows. Can I simply follow your instructions from the Mac? Yes, I think that should work, Terry. So give that a go, and yeah, we can help you out if need be. All right, so last 5 minutes, got one more question. So is there a good walkthrough for students? Great question, yeah. So the one I've sent to students seems very basic. So in terms of a walkthrough, yeah, and is that, I'm going to try and define what you mean by a walkthrough exactly. And yeah, so for students, from their perspective, for walkthrough, we do have on the customer website or support site, there is a student-specific section to this that students can be following through. If there are anything that we're missing, we could look at creating a more advanced walkthrough to describe how to go through particular aspects of sample data for students. If you're not yet aware, there are these helpful videos that are embedded in pop-ups that describe how to go about using the data panels in LT. And this is something that students see. So if you are creating your own lessons in LT, I'd recommend copying out these data panels, so these pop-ups from ADI lessons, putting them in your own lessons. And also just point out that yeah, any ADI CHT file will work. And so, yeah, just to cover off the difference, which hopefully I haven't confused you all by, between example data and read-only data is the example data is what's displayed here. And this is in a data panel. So you can see this example data. What we're doing by adding read-only technically is example data, but yeah, it's just displayed this fashion here. Sorry, that was the wrong one. So this is example data displayed here, and this is read-only data, and we can see the difference in the data panel, or sorry, the name of the panel below. So this is read-only data, and this is data sampling with example data added. Okay, all right. So, and coming back to some more questions. So from Liz, can comments be added to the example data though? So at the moment, no, comments can't be added, but hopefully in the coming weeks, that will be a feature that students can do in LT is add example data, add comments to example data. And finally, it's done. From Amal, is there any difference between research and teaching license in terms of features? Off the top of my head, I would assume yes, there will be some. There are different tiers that you can have with LabChart. And yeah, if you reach out to your ADI representative or visit our website, you should be able to see what features are available in each of those. All right, so given that I think we've only got a couple more minutes. Oh, maybe last one from John, who's just imported a lesson, but I'm trapped in the import window. How do I escape? Call for help and see if there's any ropes that you can try and leverage yourself out of, or sometimes refreshing the page, often actually in LT, refreshing the page can resolve issues like that, and you can try the import again. If it's a large collection you're trying to import, it might just be taking a while to import. So yeah, worst comes to worst, you can close that tab of LT and open up a new one. So good luck, John. Oh, all right, last final minutes. So from Kristen Hall, all add-ins active in LTEG spirometry. Ooh, yeah, so in terms of modules in LT, in LabChart, so some of those aren't available in LT. So it is a case-by-case basis. For spirometry, there is a spirometry aspect to LT, and hopefully this won't stop halfway through my demo, but just quickly showing that there are panel options under PowerLab. So you can see there are spirometry options as well as stimulator options as well if you're wanting to be shocking your students. So yeah, there are spirometry options. Okay, so on that note, might have to leave it there, but we'll be making this recording available to you very soon. And again, please go to the LT community if you want to continue any of these discussions. And thank you for watching this, and look forward to hearing how you're going. Cheers, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.